You know, South Africa is a land that is alive with possibilities. I had to use the tagline, but it's true. It's true. The fact that we have configured ourselves out of the apartheid pattern to move into what many would argue is a new apartheid pattern, just given a new aesthetic.
Yes, yeah.
But nonetheless, with our culture having really been the lifeblood of how we revive our identity, it's no wonder that abantu abafana no Chuck D in a recent interview where he was on Sway literally declared that
Hip hop,
the future of hip hop is in Africa, using his argument that people who can rap in three languages
or four,
that have a range that not only incorporates your enunciations but also kind of slips into guttural sounds, clicks, that it far outweighs the capacity of any average American rapper.
Yes.
Now that's an
because
interesting.
they only in one language, in English.
That's all.
Yeah,
Now we felt the need to kind of bring that to the fore. Is Chuck D being realistic? Is that prophecy something that is actively being fulfilled as we speak? Is the future of hip-hop in Africa, or is that just the kind of idealistic musings of an old head who feels disappointed by his own people around him and hence has kind of projected the capacity for hip-hop to grow beyond the borders? I don't know, this is the conversation, Ta-Kaizer. What do you think?
With Ta-Kaizer, anyway, we haven't done this for a while.
In a minute!
So, in a way, I always felt like the future, I don't know the future, but I always felt like, Africa should take an opportunity when it comes to hip hop and carve their own path, and not, pander or, whatever we're doing here in South Africa, where most people will, if you sound more American, if everything
That
is
opens up
more
the gates.
inclined, it opens up the gates, The fact that we're exporting the likes of Olanduka or Nasty C, all that instead of KO, if
Right.
you're going there, so I always felt like, it is possible that the future of hip hop is in Africa, but do Africans know?
It's interesting because a lot of Africans have made the argument that, man, if rappers in Africa were all that good, the Kwaito generation would have transcended and broken through to America in the 90s. Now, a lot of people who use that argument are unknowingly ignorant of the fact that in order to transcend in the 90s, there wasn't the direct access to a global audience that is literally at the touch of a button right now. You needed the kind of system in place that would not only bridge you to the global market, but create a need for the music.
You had to make networks.
Exactly.
Meet people who know someone who knows someone.
Right. Now the fundamental difference between today's market and yesteryear's market is Americans weren't really checking for African content like that. There was a certain kind of curated idea of what Africa was, especially in the music. People knew Africa for this kind of classical djembe drum, tribal aesthetic. I mean, the best that Africa was known for in the global world is Ladysmith, Black Mambazo, Yusundu, Angelique Kidjo. These kind of artists who've been labeled world music under a title that purposefully is made to kind of saturate Africa into this identity that fits in with the stereotype that Africa is music of the past. So Yusundu, Angelique Kidjo, and Ladysmith Black Mambazo didn't have incorporations of modern day digital electronic aspects to their music. As a result, the Western world felt comfortable in introducing that kind of African music. Nowadays it's different. The kind of African music that's being made is more and more influenced by the electronic wave, by the dance music scene, and as a result it sounds nothing like Angelique Kidjo or Yusundu, as great and as majestic and as powerful as their music were, it spoke to the echoes of the past more than it did to gestures of the future. So I think that argument because it ignores the practicalities of what the world expected of Africa back then. It ignores the fact that the transition to being global couldn't happen because Africa was still being pigeonholed in this kind of ancient music paradigm. Now it's different. Not only are we in the age of a kind of postmodern internet network that allows for anybody to get in touch with anybody in the world, we're in a place where young Africans are more and more being influenced by music that sets its stage in the clubs, music that sets its stage alongside other forms of electronic dance music. We've seen artists like Obanjuar, the Nigerian cat. We've seen the rise of Afrobeats. We've seen a lot of eclectic, interesting electronic dance music come out of Africa. Most notably, for us as South Africans, we've seen the rise of some of our most talented DJs truly establish themselves as global names.
Global names, yes.
With a sound that can be said to have African influence, but it's very much diasporic. It's influenced by things that were happening in the States, in Europe. Because when we talk about electronic dance music as a whole, it's this interesting intersection of Europe and America and Africa.
And Africa
so
also.
it makes for a perfect melting pot for a lot of global artists to come together. But what about hip-hop? Can the same happen?
Like as I was asking, do hip-hop artists, and I don't mean only rappers, you know, because I remember when we had this conversation, we had a conversation with the b-boy rhythm.
Shout out
you
to
know,
Rhythm
last year on our Elements of the Hip Hop series, and he talked about the fact that back in the 90s there was only this one crew managed to make it into the world champions, into the finals, and that was the only time that a South African b-boy breakers made it to the finals. Up until now, no one has ever made it there.
Right.
And you know, I'm interested in because there's something you've also said when our private conversations where like you were saying, what if your breakers could incorporate African dance, like what we know Itwalat and in breaking,
in the context of breaking.
Yeah, in the context of breaking.
Yeah.
So I've always wondered if anyone, even anyone who's watching, if you even have that clip, or even the guys, because people couldn't tell us who are the members of those, like I would like to see even the video of how they were doing their dance,
right?
Their set. Maybe they had something unique that was unique from that American aesthetic.
Touching on that uniqueness again, Chuck D's statement is premised upon the idea that it is in our identity, in our linguistic structure, that we can win over the global world. Now it feels like we being South Africans in particular.
Yeah, because we know.
I don't think this sentiment would necessarily generate to other parts of Africa. I want to just zoom back and go back to where we're settled.
Yeah.
South Africa is being plagued by a low self-esteem atmosphere that allows us to only believe in ourselves when we've been endorsed by the rest of the world.
Yes.
We do not have the pride and the cultural self-belief to take initiative in our own styles. I mean, there has never been a moment where a South African called the success of their own unique style before the world acknowledged it. It's always been the world acknowledging it, then South Africa kind of opening up its ears and feeling its feelers into the world. So I think that if Chuck D's prophecy is going to be fulfilled, particularly in South Africa, I think it could be fulfilled in other parts of Africa. Shout out to Nigeria. Shout out to Ghana. Shout out to Mali, Tanzania.
Yeah.
Because there are countries where the colonial influences were not as kind of deeply entrenched in the way that the people reinforce their own identities, because there's different kinds of colonies. South Africa being a settler colony where white people still live here. The permeating influence of how we look at ourselves as blacks in this particular country is different to the way that Nigerians, who basically live amongst themselves, and it's a world where they govern amongst each other, where there is no kind of overarching white silver lining to save them from their own regression. Here in South Africa, we still suffer from a strong anti-blackness, which we haven't addressed, which allows us to always take the things that come from our immediate setting and put them aside in order for us to adapt. Exactly. So you made the example of the rappers that we've exported are always rappers who appeal to the global West. So as a result, if Chuck D's prophecy is going to be able to be fulfilled, particularly for a South African artist, because we need to echo the sentiments of other African artists. We've seen Ghanaians and Nigerians work the West by being proud of their own unique cadences and styles and their dance music. But South Africans not so much, because we are kind of crippled by this handout that we are always stretching towards Western approval. I don't know what you think about that, okay?
Yeah, and and I wanna add on because I was about the dance. With the b-boys. I saw a clip that was trending a few weeks ago, and it was also sponsored by Red Bull. I think it was freestyle dancing, and then there were those pantsulas. And then I think it was in New York or somewhere, but it was in America.
They tore it up.
And then Americans were fucking going gung ho. And you know what's funny? Here in South Africa, people were sharing that and like, yeah, we've got this. And I'm asking myself, but you guys, we've had this. We've had language about.
We've had Beyonce literally have a whole choreographed pansula segment on Goes Round the World.
Goes Round the World, yeah.
We've had numerous global artists use pansula dancing as a kind of exposition into modern African dance, and still
we didn't capitalize on it.
No South Africans have taken those glimmers of influence and capitalized, because we're living with, this is capitalism, right?
Yeah.
So if we don't have the initiative to capitalize on the culture economy, because ultimately that's what capitalism thrives on. It is an economy that uses culture as a medium of influence. The things that we like can be associated to certain people. And the thing is, they become so big that we lose the fact that they used to be an indigenous art form. They become global. And I think we don't understand that, particularly as South Africans, that the little things that we have that are ours, from dancing isibhujwa to ipansula to all of the classical dances that used to be invented from a shibin to a club corner to just ikasi in general, to the way that we walk, to itsotsital, iringas, the way that we speak in our own hoods, to our own unique interpretation of street fashion and culture. These are things that have a massive capacity to bridge themselves as forces of influence into the world, especially now that kind of African revivalism is in vogue. So I think, again, let's look at our Nigerian and Ghanaian brothers and sisters in the kind and how they've navigated. And if Chuck D's prophecy is to be fulfilled, I really think it's either going to be a Nigerian, a Ghanaian, or a South African. Not because all the other African countries are inferior, but just because those three countries' proximity to the West in terms of pop culture has already been established. And what America knows about Ghana and Nigeria and South Africa is pretty much part of their collective imagination. I mean, sometimes you hear the odd American talking about Zulu people, Mandela. You hear the odd American talking about Kwame Nkrumah. You hear the odd American talking about Nigeria. And
they visit South Africa, they will tell you about, I visit Cape Town,
it's nice, Johannesburg, I went to Lagos, So I think if Chuck D's prophecy is going to be fulfilled, it's these three countries, and we can go into why, because these are the countries that have the most powerful proximity to capitalism. in Africa.
Yeah, in Africa.
And therefore, they have become the kind of African bearers of bridging their continental culture to the rest of this capitalist universe. So it isn't because, again, it isn't because they're special. It's just because that they've been able to pander to the West better than other African countries.
Yeah.
So in the context of Chuck D's prophecy, do I think it's possible? Very, very possible. Because we live in an era where the biggest rapper in the world right now is not an American. It's a Canadian.
It's a Canadian. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
We live in an era where a rapper who shares Haitian influences is currently killing this quote-unquote underground scene by the name of Mark Hami. And half of his rhymes, he speaks them in Haitian Creole. With boom bap beats that are still banging. So I think right now, I can imagine, I can see an artist who doesn't need to spit in English.
Yes.
Whose flow is so killer that he could make a premier beat work, a Hit Boy beat work. He just needs to work around realizing the capacity of his own style. See, this is why I would have preferred a Questa or a KO to be the
exported.
one that we export instead of a Nasty C. Because Nasty is now despondent and in a place where he's not sure where to go. But I swear, I think if we would export the kind of artist that is not immediately recognizable to the Western configuration of doing things, we would be able to truly have a special artist, especially if they knew how to bridge both worlds, how to rap well in English, but still weave in some elements of African identity from where they come from that make the Americans go sideways on some. I don't know what you just said, but nigga, that's the illest shit I've ever heard, and I think that's the key.
Kind of reminds me of that saying, but I didn't know what he said, but I felt it.
But I felt it. We see this now in the massive rise of Amapiano as a genre.
Yeah, in terms of sound, I wanted to go there. But I wanted to go in, the fact that we always say there is no, when we talk about, on this podcast, we always talk about originality.
Right. Authenticity.
So, taking it back home, whatever what they call it. But here's the thing. Amapiano, it's becoming a hot property. Not only in South Africa now, it's been exported heavily.
States.
It's in the States
heavily. It's in the States now. It's in the UK now.
Yeah. In the context of, let's say, a boom bap or let's say a quote unquote hip hop beat, because I feel like there's no hip hop beat. But anyway, that's another episode. But anyway, I look at beat makers or let's say producers like Umakoveni.
Ooh.
You hear what he does with the fucking log drum on his beats.
Come on.
He's doing what the Mapiano are doing, but he's doing in you would call hip hop way.
Right.
If someone would actually rap, whoever was these guys who are the echelons of South African rap circles. Let's say a KO would actually spit on a Makoveni beat. And then people will know that there is a South African beat, there is a South African sound.
You're touching on a very, very important point, I guess, because a couple of months ago, Kelvin more trended because Drake shared his album saying it's a spiritual, quote-unquote, spiritual experience.
Yeah.
And I think this is where you are touching with the brother Magoveni. Shout out to Magoveni. There are producers who make beats that are trying to incorporate sounds that speak to global trend.
Yes.
But then there are producers who are being moved by something a little deeper. They're being moved by the intention to create an ecstatic experience.
Yeah.
The kind of music that can possibly get you out of your body. And I think Africans are known for this. We're known for people who beat a rhythm so deep that it takes us out of our bodies.
Yeah.
We are known for people who can create music that literally transfers us to the quote-unquote spirit world.
Yeah.
Whether that is true or not, whether that can be ontologically tested, this is some shit that we're known for.
Yeah.
And I think this is our quote-unquote brand, if you want to take it there. The producers who are tapped in to everything that's happening right now, be it the AI be it the convergence of how technology is now moving in a direction where social media is capturing the attention economy and music is becoming, snackable content. There are producers who are listening to the waves of the future and are tapping into an ancestral vibration. Magoveni is one of those producers. The log drums come from this modern sentiment, or maybe postmodern.
Postmodern, yeah.
And the openness, the space, they call it ambience. It's this music that creates a mood that's larger than the actual room you're in. Where when you listen to it, you feel like you're being transported into another world. And I really think you're right. This is the key to how Africans are going to be able to set a rhythmic tone that truly brings hip-hop into Africa. And I think this is why piano speaks so much to Americans, particularly African Americans. It has elements of electronic dance music with deep synths and bass lines that echo a little bit of that hip-hop appeal. Also, it travels in a place where the metric timing of it is very similar to the kind of Chicagoan influence of the house. But at the very same time, it's African.
Yep.
And that's why you're gonna have Jay-Z blasting on my piano on his way to, that nigga Mike Rubin's party. So this is where we are. And maybe these are the keys to Chuck D's prophecy. Maybe Chuck D's been blasting some piano, listening to some KO, smoking a blunt, thinking, my God, Africa is where it is at right now.
Yeah. And so, before we conclude this episode, I wanted to touch on something you alluded to, or earlier. You were talking about, when we're talking about...
that beer is kicking in.
Yeah.
Burping all over the place. Yeah. Right? Sponsor the headspace.
Yeah, glass. So you touched on the fact that, our unique ways, if we tap on the uniqueness,
right.
Because we're talking about South Africa,
of our movement,
of our movement and our sound, and you touched on the fact that what's when it comes to rappers, and I'm sure we probably said it before, and I'm gonna say it again. Authenticity is tapping into what you actually do on an everyday basis.
Right.
So it's total the way we talk, the way you talk is actually not the way Ebonics.
Right.
Ebonics, Ebonics. It's an American term. It's an American term
for their slang.
For their slang. Tina too. But the fact that we as rappers, we take their own language and replace it.
Yeah.
Is actually alienating ourselves.
Yeah.
Because I feel like...
Hey, you're getting political again.
Yeah, because I feel like...
niggas might be mad at you.
Yeah, but because I feel like when I look at these terms, the reason why sasingaviwa ngabanye simane sicela about afuna cause states up zibraza up area is because of the way we talked.
Yeah.
When we talk to each other, we talk a certain way because asina siziniggas. But xa uhleli nabantu abanye, everyone who is not into hip hop, you talk normally. Like what a South African would talk.
Yeah.
So lenuba a trick. Mungakazi has a trick, but what is fair? Fuck, I know.
Yeah.
Sure. That's what I was saying. Rappers. It's keberesh. No. But if you're gonna say someone is a thought, and people like you don't go play. I feel like it's something also rappers should actually tap into, and that's what rappers that you were talking about. Or Questa and KO. They are exportable because they are already doing this.
Yeah.
And then your English speaking rappers will look at them like, I don't know what you gotta say about that.
Yeah. Look, what I gotta say is it's a dialogue. So I think we can take certain terms, but we're never gonna use them the same way they use there. Yeah. And I think my main and major complaint is there's a lot of mimicry going on in South African rap, where when cats hold their earphones and step into the mic, it's almost as if they closed their eyes and they imagined that they were rapping.
They're rapping
to Americans in an American setting. It's almost
Madison
like
Square.
It's almost like, yeah, not even Madison Square. It's almost like they time travel, or they teleport rather, from Esotra or Emama or Esoshangube or Emlazi all the way to Georgia, you know, or Brownsville, and they just see themselves there, and they speak in the way they think they'd be able to. They need to speak
because
when they're there. Because look, I'm from a generation where we were influenced by a lot of hip hop, and we assimilated a lot of their terms. But I use the term nigger fruitfully and frequently.
Yes.
And I use it alongside terms like Owens, Majita, Buddhas. And so I think for me it is the open appreciation to the fact that when I take and I openly am influenced by things that come from the outside, they come to me and they resonate in a different way because they're in a different environment. So if I'm gonna call Ime Devaya right there, or thought, it's gonna be mixed in a way that makes thought contextual to South Africa. I think the perfect artist right now who exudes this, the fact that they can use terms that are traveling and migrating and are fugitive in different places, is Maglera Dopo.
Maglera, yeah.
Fucking Maglera even incorporates elements of Portuguese and Italian into his own slang because of the influences of Klerksdorp and certain Portuguese people that he might have met or interacted with, and he incorporates it into the slang, even to the point of naming whole tracks like Totu Porvo. You know what I mean? And so it's like he keeps himself flowing in a way where
nobody asks
because he'll take the Portuguese influence, the Maglera influence, the American influence, and it'll all make sense. Dopo is Tony Montana, Shova like he in a van, Kuluva pardon my manners, I'm maneuver with the jammers, I'm gonna feel with the bammers. It's like, oh my nigga, it makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, he just went from America, he went to a Klerksdorp, he went to the streets, and this is what we're lacking. This kind of fluent where you're not mimicking. You are taking, I'm influenced a little bit by America.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna make America come here to me. So I think that's how we need to be thinking if we're gonna really get the American attention, where even the things they hear that come from them are gonna be like, oh, okay, there's a little bit of something I'm familiar with, but I'm meeting it in a way where it feels like something new.
Yes.
So Chuck D's prophecy, I'm gonna call it, I think.
Because we were asking in the beginning, is it true?
We're in 2023, right?
Yeah.
So I think if Chuck D's prophecy doesn't come alive by 2030, it will never come alive. I really think we're in a place right now where the advent of piano, the emergence of artists like a Maglera Dopo into popularity are now making people cultivate the things that are uniquely South African about them. The massive success of a Burna Boy who's out there fraternizing with the RZA from Wu-Tang. Youngster a couple of days ago just posted a picture with the Wu-Tang Clan right now. So I think we're in an age where the melding of the cultures is becoming visible, even to just the person who's not awoke to certain kind of political subtlety.
And I feel like Youngster is probably the perfect artist to be, interacting with.
Oh my God, he
is the perfect artist.
If Youngster can even sneak in one feature from any Wu-Tang member, then it's over. It's curtains. He'd be a legend in my opinion.
And one last thing before we go, I forgot to say this. With reference to Jay-Z playing piano, you said something that if he's playing it, he's probably already figured out how to rap on them. Man. So now imagine now if Hope would come out like end of the year with a song, a rapper on a fucking piano beat. What would all these rap fundamentalists who've been always on piano?
There'd be two sides. Yeah. There's some niggas who'd be on some. I always said Hov was a sellout.
Okay.
But then there'd be those who are low-key calling their piano producing friends to hop on a beat, because that's how heads be.
Yeah.
But it's a very, very important note, and I think just to kind of last word on my part, Kaizer, is the fact that I think what time does is that it always reminds you of the things that you are destined to make great. You know, it's doing that to each and every one of us.
Yes.
And I think those who are sensitive to that are going to take hold and advantage of it, and those who aren't are going to allow others to take advantage of it. And I think if Africans at large don't take advantage of the wave of African interest that capitalism is intentionally churning out, we will be in an era that is very similar to the Black Power era. Remember in the late 70s to the early 80s, where the revival in the need to know where they come from in America as Africans created this phenomenon where they wore their afros, they wore beautiful African garments and dashikis, they tapped into African music. There was a migration of African superstars who were being exiled, like the Brahima Sekelas, the Letambulus. It was a beautiful time where there was an organic conversation of struggle happening between the brothers in the diaspora, brothers and sisters in the diaspora, and the brothers and sisters on the continent. And I think we lost out on that because capitalism co-opted it. Capitalism took that and turned it into just another phase. And if we miss out on this, it will be just another phase. It will be like, yo, remember that time where we almost, you know? So I think if we don't want it to be almost, now is the time. If you're making music, think about how that music can speak to who you are in your unique environment. And this is all across Africa. Now is our time. If we are going to be able to deconstruct capitalism as a whole, starting from the simple things about how it markets its musical reproduction, rappers take note, producers take note of what's going on right now, because Chuck D said what he said for a reason. He knew Africans listened to Sway, and as a result, it was a prophecy in two ways. He wants it to happen, and because he wants it to happen, he spoke it to the world so that Africans would be listening. So I hope you motherfuckers were listening to Chuck D, and you're gonna try to make it happen. I'm Vijay, the brother from the Ancient Mother.
Ta-Kaizer, don't forget to subscribe. Yonga Londo Leyo. Peace.
Love you.